Faster by. Good afternoon. It's 6 minutes after 12. Mannin line today is looking at our net zero aspirations, our targets, how we're going to get there. In May 2019, the Chief Minister then recognised the global climate emergency and the need for urgent climate action in the Isle of Man. The Council of Ministers Phase 1 action plan quickly followed. Tynwald unanimously approved it in January 2020. Of course, both had COVID. Anyway, what's going to happen to reach net zero emissions by 2050? The Isle of Man's going to need to significantly reduce the amount of greenhouse gases. And lots more to pack in as well. And if you want to get in touch, by all means, text, email, call or WhatsApp. Call 66 13 68. Text 166 177. Email studio@manxradio.com. And the WhatsApp number is 166 177 as well. Now, today, Andrew Langan-Newton is here. He's the leader of the Isle of Man Green Party. And John Curtis, a businessman very much involved in net zero aspirations. In fact, so much involved, his company's called Net Zero Matrix.
That's
Andrew,
right, Andy.
Hi. Just take us back to the beginning. When did the concept of net zero first appear? Not your company, in general.
Well, Andy, thank you first of all for inviting me onto the programme today, and it's good to be here with Andrew as well to discuss this very important subject for the island. So I suppose, the first indications of changes to the climate would have been about 20, 30 years ago. As a matter of fact, there are quite a lot of signs that the energy companies, in particular ExxonMobil, were aware of the impact upon the burning of fossil fuels on the environment, perhaps even 30 years ago. And the energy lobby, as you know, in the United States is very powerful, and a lot of this information was suppressed. But I would say, Andy, probably about 15, 20 years ago, when they were going through the various meetings and which culminated in the Paris Agreement, I think there was a more public awareness of the fact that we needed to address the fact that we can't keep on burning fossil fuels forever, that we need to identify how to reduce those and, of course, how to switch to renewable energy sources in the years ahead.
Okay. Andrew Langan-Newton, leader of the Green Party, when did you first come to your position regarding the climate, to green matters in general?
Well, the Isle of Man Green Party was founded in August 2016, so I guess it won't be any surprise to your listeners that since that day we were calling for decarbonisation of our energy system.
As far as you're concerned personally, though, have you been a greenie all your life?
Yeah, I think very much, and certainly our education system set out, even when I was studying my GCSEs and A-levels at Castle Rushen High School, going on 15, 20 years ago now. The climate change was a topic that was starting to be discussed. The Isle of Man had the Kyoto Protocol extended to it in 2006 from memory, and that was a significant global agreement that was superseded by the Paris Agreement in 2015-16. But there were never the discussions that we're having now. But even in the last 3 to 4 years, the playing field has changed so much. The conversation has changed so much. So probably in my time, there was 15, 20 years where there was very little change in conversation.
Do you sense a ramping up of the agenda, of the momentum?
Oh, 2023 has been a significant year already. I think it was the 22nd of February when Alf Cannon made his announcement, knocked me off my chair. I hadn't heard anything like that announcement from the leadership in the Isle of Man government in terms of three things: the timescale, and just to remind your listeners, the announcement was 30 megawatts of renewable energy by 2026. Short time frame, 3 years. Fairly significant amount of renewables. Green Party would still say marginal amount, but also 20 megawatts of wind turbines. We're not seeing wind turbines, serious wind turbines on the island. The small ones, like you could go to Guernsey and see a very small one there. And John Whittaker tried to put up some small ones in Port Erin, but we've not seen really serious ones. Like you look across the window here. Your listeners can't see that, but we look across to Morecambe and we see huge wind turbines. That's what we're starting to talk about. And Alf Cannon said we're going to get them.
Okay. Do you believe him? Is it realistic?
Well, I mean, he's going to go into an election in 2026. Those wind turbines won't go up in one day. The planning will have to have started now, and they will start. The shovels will be going into the ground probably in the next year or a year and a half. So Mr. Cannon will be going into an election, assuming he wants re-election in 2026, having to defend what he's said and the promises he's made otherwise.
And do you anticipate, John Curtis, will that be onshore or offshore wind turbines around the Isle of Man?
Well, it's quite notable, Andy, that the Isle of Man is the only country I know of in the world that does not have a single commercial wind turbine of any type, whether offshore or onshore. Of course, everybody cares about the environment and the visual lack of appeal that wind turbines would have. But in fact, we have to meet our obligations. The Isle of Man has joining with the UK in the Paris Agreement. And as Andy said, these very welcome announcements by the government need to be followed by very rapid action, because we are a very long way behind. Just to give you some idea, the UK has what's called a nationally determined contribution, where it commits to reducing greenhouse gas emissions now by at least 68% by 2030, that's 7 years, compared to 1990 levels. And here we are on the Isle of Man, our emissions are still going up. Another thing that I was very disappointed with, which I think is worth mentioning, is that the government did go out to a public consultation to ask the general public what their opinion was and whether they should have a reduction by 2030 of 35% of the current greenhouse emission levels, or whether it should be 45% by that same year. Now, the response was a little disappointing, perhaps. There were 611 responses, but of those, 95% came from individuals and only 5% from companies. And companies, of course, are the main contributors to the greenhouse emissions on the island. And I feel that that's disappointing, and maybe the government should step in and perhaps force the companies to make some declaration as to what they're going to be doing in these coming 7 years to do their part to reduce the greenhouse emissions. Just finally on that point, Andy, if I may, the figures when the report came out weren't presented that well, because as a matter of fact 20% of the respondents wanted the decarbonisation to be greater than 45%. So in other words, 58% of people were for a 45% reduction by 2030, but as a matter of fact, it went through Tynwald and they changed it to the year 2035. In other words, not only did they not take into account what the general public were asking for, they changed it without actually going out with another due consultation. Thank you, Andy, for asking me.
Okay, Julian, hi, you're live with Andrew Langan-Newton and John Curtis.
Hi, Andy, and hello, John and Andrew.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Hi, I've got two questions, one for each of you. John first. I've been hearing your regular net zero matrix advert for a long time, but today I'd like to ask you about the company that you're president of, Energy View. I think View, V-U-E, all one word. To give some context to my question, could I please ask Andy to bring up a YouTube page and search for Energy View, V-U-E.
Okay, well, we don't have time to do that, Julian. If you just get to the nub of the question.
Okay. This will show an Energy View advert, and I can ask anybody that's looking at it to pause that video at 15 seconds in. Some background for listeners. Energy View repurposes the technology from John's other business, PetrolLink, which PetrolLink sends flow data from oil wells to the customer, whereas I think your Energy View company sends energy data from the wind turbine. So 15 seconds into the Energy View advert, there is a map of the Isle of Man marked with 59 large wind turbines peppered across the northern hills and the mountain, covering an area roughly from Baldrine across to Ingerbreck and then up to North Barrule and then across to the Solby Valley. So, John, my question is, does your map represent the future layout of wind turbines on the Isle of Man, and what is Energy View's involvement in this?
Well, first of all, Energy View has no involvement in that. But as I just mentioned, we do have to decarbonise. If the Kroger development goes ahead, that's fine. We all know that there has to be a transition phase from the use of fossil fuels across to renewables. But the wind turbines will have to be built, and they will have to go somewhere if we're to decarbonise. And wherever they go, we'll wait and see in due course.
59.
Well, I'm not proposing there should be 59 at all. And certainly this company, Energy View, has no business activity here on the Isle of Man that is involved with putting wind turbines up. I wish we did.
Okay. And, I mean, do you see any conflict, John, in the fact that you've been involved in petrochemicals for a long time and now you're into new technology?
None whatsoever. As a matter of fact, it's the very same industry, the energy industry, which is largely going to solve the problem of net zero, because it isn't going to be possible to completely decarbonise our homes and our businesses. There is going to be what's called a remnant carbon footprint for all people and all companies. And the way that will be offset to reach the state of net zero, where continued emissions into the atmosphere are balanced by removals, is through what's called a removals technology. That might be known and understood by most people as the planting of trees, of the protection of peat, etc. But in fact, the technological reduction in carbon emissions is in fact by sequestering the carbon dioxide, compressing it and pumping it back down into the very same formations that produce the fossil fuels in the first place. This is a very big emerging industry. There's a huge investment going on in the United States and in the North Sea. It's called either direct air capture or carbon capture and storage, and it is the future. And in fact, this industry, which I have been proudly a member of for many years, which provides you and all of your listeners with the energy that they have today, is very much part of the energy transition and is going to build the technology which is going to help us to decarbonise in the future.
Okay, Julian?
Your map is highly alarming to anyone, including, I should imagine, anyone with a green leaning. That is literally a peppering across probably 15,000 acres of the island. Anyway, I'll come back to you another time, John, when you're on, because I understand that Energy View is registered on the Isle of Man. But anyway, we'll talk about that another time. Can I ask Andrew, UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, has again issued a warning that at least 40,000 children down to the age of 4 years old are hand mining cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo for lithium-ion battery manufacture. They have to crawl for 1.5 hours down makeshift mine shafts with no health and safety measures. As the net zero goal will require about 1,600 years worth of 2019 mining, and my question to you, Andrew, is what is your opinion on child slavery, especially in relation to cobalt mining? Does this contravene the Isle of Man government's anti-slavery clause under its procurement policy? And how many more children will it require to achieve net zero goals by 2050, considering its 1,600 years worth of mining?
Thank you, Julian. And sorry, I was late getting my headphones on at the start, so apologies I didn't reciprocate with your introduction. So, yeah, a really important question, and a similar question you might ask is about the Uyghur minority in China and the issues that have been raised around there. We shouldn't shy away from these really important issues around transparency, about supply chain management. And as you rightly pointed, we don't have all the regulations and laws that they do in England and Wales around global slavery and everything. And I encourage Tynwald to take proactive steps in that respect. But we should absolutely not shy away. But in the same sense, we should recognise the difference between our extant fossil fuel industry and the extraction that takes place all over the world against the size and scale of what you're talking about in terms of the precious metals, in terms of the lithium that is extraction. And it's very clear that it's a minute compared to our current extraction system. So transitioning to electricity, transitioning to electrifying our heating systems, our generation and our use of energy is going to actually save a huge amount of energy, and it's going to save a huge amount of communities around the world that are directly afflicted by the consumption of our Western societies as we drive our cars, as we heat our homes. So we should be expediting that transition. With that transition, we should also be encouraging better practices for the use. And so we've seen publications in the last 6 months alone of a continued decline of use of cobalt in our batteries, in our electric vehicles, etc. So this is a trend that can only continue with the improvements of knowledge and improvements of technology. So your point is germane, and it's really important to raise. However, it's not the fatalistic approach that you respectfully suggest. I think it's one of positive transition for global communities around the world.
But Andrew, if kids are being sent down mines to get cobalt and lithium, surely that's unconscionable nowadays, no matter how you couch it.
Absolutely, but with respect and deference, cobalt is not the only thing we use. Electric vehicles is not the only way we use cobalt. So actually, all vehicles use these precious metals that are being mined in these egregious practices that we should be decrying and encouraging bodies around the world, as well as our own national governments, to introduce legislation, as I referred to earlier, to ensure our supply chains are properly held to account.
Okay, final word, Julian?
I know you're talking about moving away from cobalt, but you're talking about NFA batteries, which is short for nickel, iron from ferrous and aluminium. But if we're going to go that route, the largest supplier of raw nickel is China, and refined nickel is Russia, and would require about 380 years equivalent of mining. Are we going to hand everything to Russia and China in that case in terms of our transition?
Well, I don't think that's what I was suggesting, and certainly we're not going to be doing any transactions with Russia in the near future, as I'm sure you can imagine. So yeah, I mean the exciting prospect now is we're seeing huge investments into new battery technology that's going to bring with it huge rewards for better, efficient, cleaner batteries that respect our human rights in better ways than we're delivering now.
Okay, Julian, thanks for calling today.
Thanks very much,
All right.
Andy.
Okay, good to hear from you. It's 23 minutes past 12 with John Curtis and Andrew Langan-Newton. John from netzeromatrix.com, a businessman involved in this transitional phase of our energy world. And Andrew Langan-Newton is head of the Green Party. I just want to ask you, John Curtis, tell me, why is ivy so important? Why is cutting ivy off trees so important? I was looking at...
yes. Well, thanks for mentioning that, Andy.
It's something about rotting trees give off carbon dioxide.
Well,
is that right?
if the tree can remain living, it binds the carbon dioxide which it has absorbed to create the tree as part of the process of photosynthesis. For the children listening, they'll know about that. So photosynthesis of all animal matter stores carbon dioxide within the vegetable matter, and in the case of a tree, it stores an enormous amount. If the tree dies earlier than it would normally do because it's been strangled by ivy, then the carbon dioxide which is held within the tree will be released into the atmosphere much faster. I would really thank you for offering the opportunity to mention this, because if you drive through, for example, the Glen by the Ferry Bridge, you'll see that every tree in there is totally smothered by ivy. If in the olden days, perhaps 100 years ago, woodmen would keep the ivy off the trees, and they would stay alive for much longer. So
is that something you'd suggest that the government, the council, the government to do, that for DEFRA should be getting rid of ivy off trees?
Absolutely, but every individual has a part to play here. It doesn't take much effort. It only takes a hacksaw, a wood saw, to cut out about 3 inches of the ivy as it's going up the tree, and it will die naturally, the ivy, and the tree will have another 20-30 years of life, which will improve the beauty of our glens, and also protect and store the carbon dioxide to prevent it being released into the atmosphere.
And is it true that of all the rotting trees, that gives off more carbon dioxide than, well, most anything else? I mean, dying trees around the world give off carbon dioxide, and if we could stop that or mitigate that, that would help us.
It would, and in fact, to recommend anybody, if they're going to change their furniture, to get a wooden table, because the wood is held in that table for 50, 100 years, and it's then stored and it's not released into the atmosphere. So the rotting vegetable matter will release more amounts of carbon dioxide, Andy. So it's something that everybody can do, every school, every community. It takes but just a few minutes to cut out a little bit of the ivy as it's going up the tree, and that ivy will die away and the tree will blossom again instead of dying and falling across the road in many cases.
OK, 26 minutes past 12. Mannin Line today. We're looking at our net zero aspirations with John Curtis and Andrew Langan-Newton.
From our castles to our cottages, our museums and the Great Laxey Wheel. You'll find hidden treasures around every corner when you visit a Manx National Heritage Site. Fill your summer making treasured memories with Manx National Heritage. Sites now open every day. By visiting, you help protect our treasured island for generations to come. Plan your visit today at manxnationalheritage.im.
This old house needed new windows. This old house needed a new door. And with DPM Conservatories, we got all that and more. Now our bills are lower and the house is warmer too. We're cleaner and we're greener since we swapped our old for new. Stunning A+ rated replacement windows and doors, expertly fitted by DPM Conservatories. Phone 612 333 or find them on Facebook and swap your old for new.
At Mountain View Innovation Centre, we're all about finding new, innovative ways to do things, and that extends to our food. Right now, we're looking for a catering partner to run our on-site Babbage's Bistro and Bar. With a unique revenue sharing model, you pay no rents, no rates, and no energy bills. So, if you want the chance to really make your mark on the island's hospitality industry, hit the catering opportunity button at mvic.im and find out more.
Sport has a new home on social media for Manx Radio, where you can keep up to date with all the latest sporting action on the Isle of Man. Our new dedicated Manx Radio Sports Facebook page is now live, bringing you all the latest sports news and features. So whether it's motorsport, FC Isle of Man, Manx football, rugby, hockey and much more besides. Make sure to like and follow Manx Radio Sport on Facebook for all the latest updates. On air and online, this is your home for sport on Ireland, the nation station, Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Faster my, it's 28 minutes past 12. Today with John Curtis and Andrew Langan-Newton talking about our net zero aspirations and the actions to achieve them. A week on Monday, actually, the DEFA Minister will be in, Claire Barber MHK, and the Interim Chief Exec, Steve Stanley, will be here, so we'll ask them about what they're doing about the trees on the Isle of Man. And incidentally, a fortnight today, Daphne Kane MHK will be in, along with Dave Sowden and Clive Cullister, members of the Climate Change Transformation Board. In fact, I had a question in about what happened to the £42 million. Maybe we'll ask Daphne Kane in a couple of weeks' time. Juan, hi, you're live with Andrew Langan-Newton and John Curtis.
Hi, good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Andrew. Good afternoon, John. Good afternoon. John, are you here today? I'm just going to ask you, are you here today as a businessman or as a government representative or a government capacity, or just promoting your business?
I have no connection with the government whatsoever. I am a businessman on the island, but I'm here today because I care very deeply about the Isle of Man's commitment towards net zero and the apparent lack of progress.
Yeah, I think we all care about the future of the island, and I think we all agree with that. And I also agree that there's been a lot of corruption for the so-called fossil fuels down through the years. The emphasis being on it might not even be a fossil fuel when you look at the actual science of it. But I noticed that your business, looking back through Petrolink and Energy View, etc., and you had a connection with the oil industry, and now you've gone on to the renewables. Is this then because you have a passion for renewables, or is this just another business model for you?
You can take any energy company in the world, from Saudi Aramco the largest oil company in the world, all the way down to the smallest, Kroger, and you will find that they are in a transition. Kroger's own website says that they see that there is a requirement to have a transition. They are intending to be involved with wind farms to offset the increased carbon emissions that will come from their drilling operations. Every single energy company and all of the companies that serve in that industry, such as my own, are engaged with finding ways in which the transition will be as smooth as possible, so that the objectives of the Paris Agreement, to which the Isle of Man is now a signatory through the UK membership of the same, must meet these targets by the year 2050. And therefore there needs to be more debate, open debate about that, and people need to accept that they have to do their part as part of that transition and as part of the goal, the role and responsibility of every business, whichever industry they operate in, and every citizen of the world.
Yeah, and I noticed. I mean, the couple of times it's been on, the finger wagging there of, it's now law and you have to do this and do that, and we know laws can be changed and appealed. What my concern is the Isle of Man has had a habit of buying pups over the years, and my concern is we haven't got any more money left to buy pups. So whatever we have has got to be right for the island. Now, I'm trying to figure out with these here so-called 59 wind turbines, and I've seen the site that Julian was talking about down through the island. How are you going to get your base load? I'm still asking this question to all you people of the base loads. It doesn't seem to add up to me. The wind turbines don't work when there's no wind. The wind turbines don't work when there's too much wind. So there's going to be a lot of downtime. And you're going to transition over to this totally. And I don't understand when you stop transferring from fossil fuel cars into EVs, where you're going to actually get your base load to cope with all this, because I can't see it adding up.
First of all, before I'll hand that to Andy, because he knows a fair bit about the base load. He's been involved in it much longer than me. Just want to point out, just for the record, that I am not proposing the installation of 59 wind turbines, and I'm not involved in any way with the government, and my business as it exists is not operational on the Isle of Man, nor are we planning to implement any wind turbines here. Andy, do you want to take the question about the base load?
Yeah, happily, and just to give some context and some precepts, so I think it was about 2010 the MEA commissioned a report. Well, they commissioned one much earlier, which I think was about 2004 or 5, which again is in the public domain, as to the best sites for wind turbines in the Isle of Man. You had the next report about 2010, and you had an update of it, Appendix 14 of the current report, the current impact report, which is in the public domain, from 2019. I think it was January 2020, actually, when it was published. And in that, it sets out the best sites for wind turbines in the Isle of Man. You can go to current Appendix 14 and see their sites for about in the region of about 50 wind turbines of 5.5 megawatt turbines. I think they were Vestas wind turbines. So they are dotted across a number of areas, down from Dorby all the way up to the west coast of the island, up above Sandygate and further up round. So they've mapped out where we could generate in the region of about 500 gigawatt hours per year. Now, Isle of Man consumption is about 350 gigawatt hours. So if we put wind turbines on all those sites, which are isolated, they're not in our immediate conurbations, they would generate a huge surplus. And that's one of the points to the future transition. It's much cheaper to overproduce renewable energy, overproduce solar power, than it is to try and store all the electricity to those black swan days when you have super demand and very low winds, or a number of days, especially in wind. Solar is a lot more consistent in terms of irradiance, but wind could stop for maybe 5 days at a very black swan event, maybe one every 2 to 3 years. So we have to factor in that. The other side, obviously, so then, as you can imagine, storage is going to be a huge issue like that. There's a number of groups that have been talking about pumped hydro. We see that all the way across the world, especially Norway. They've invested in pumped hydro. You've got the former MEA chief executive, Mr. Mike Prophet. He came out on Manx Radio a few months ago talking about a wind farm at Snuff the Wind and pumped hydro. So that's just one illustration of another group. You've got another group down in Bilawan, the Peel Group, they're proposing out of their own money a 27 megawatt solar farm and a 24 megawatt battery. So the battery is there to provide that frequency balance. So we put it into the battery and we take it out when we need it.
Okay. All right, Ewan?
Yeah, I mean, it all sounds really good, Andrew. I mean, you're good. I would expect nothing better. You're a lawyer, so you're very good with words. I'm still not convinced that we've got the base load to carry on with where we're going, transferring vehicles over. I take it that the Green Initiative is really to downsize the amount of public vehicles, or private vehicles, I should say, in existence. I'm very sceptical that this operate, and I'm all for renewables, which is great, but you seem to be wanting to go hell for leather on this whole agenda and not deal with the transitionary fuels and the gas, which we're going to need in common sense to carry on with our lives as we are.
Okay. All right, Joe. We appreciate that, Joe. They're going to get some more callers in. Thanks for that. One suggestion, first of all, to both John Curtis and to Andrew Langan-Newton. John Curtis, where do you stand on the Kroger, the gas that may or may not be there under McCall? Do you think that will happen, or should happen, or shouldn't happen?
I mentioned earlier, Andy, that every single energy operator in the world is engaged in the transition phase at the moment. In fact, all of them, bar none, publish their own net zero target. They've entered into a formal target mechanism. And they've published and continue to publish every year their carbon footprints. They're having them audited by official carbon auditors. And then in many cases, particularly in Europe at the moment, those have to go to the regulator to be accepted. So they are working towards the net zero in a coherent way, and will continue to do so. Now, in the case of Kroger, Kroger.im does not have a net zero plan. It is the only operator in the world that I have seen that does not have a published net zero target and is reporting on the progress. There is no plan, and there appears to be no plan coming forward. As a matter of fact, there are no published statements whatsoever as to how Kroger intend to offset the increased carbon footprint that is going to be caused when they bring the oil rig in at the end of this year, caused by the search for new hydrocarbon reserves. This isn't actually going to reduce the carbon footprint of the island, it's actually going to increase it. And there's nothing. Now, apparently, some documents have been delivered to the government, and I did speak to Daphne Kane about that, but those documents are not for public release. I would say it's definitely in the public interest that if Kroger have come forward with plans as to how they're going to offset the increase in the island's emissions and then subsequently move to net zero themselves, as indeed every other operator in the world is doing, like BP and Shell, they need to publish this information in the public domain.
Okay,
we should see it.
Andrew Langan-Newton?
Yeah, I think what we saw last year was a huge rise in gas prices as a result of the Ukraine war, the huge the constraints on the supply system when Russia wasn't sending gas to Germany and Europe. Now we have a situation where that Ukraine war has hugely sped up the transition. Germany has removed itself from reliance on Russian gas. It's really investing in huge amounts of renewables, and that's pushed down the gas price across the world now, and we're seeing the end of these constraints, these supply shocks, and gas prices are now are really low. So, I mean, we're at a total different place to where we had all the exuberance around Kroger last year. Now we're at a position where we're talking about Ørsted coming in and opening an office in the Isle of Man and putting up wind turbines in the Isle of Man territorial sea.
Kroger yes, Kroger no.
So will I think it happen?
Yeah.
No, I don't think it will.
Okay. Well, we thank John Curtis and Andrew Langan-Newton. They're with us for a wee while longer to talk about our net zero aspirations. It's obviously going to be a complex journey, and everybody has opinions. Everybody is armed with various amounts of facts, and it's something that's going to go on and on and on. But the simple fact is, it's coming. It's one that it's necessary to ensure that we get the most out of it and that we handle it. And if you've got any questions for Andrew Langan-Newton or John Curtis, and they know of what they speak, then by all means do get in touch. Our net zero future for the Isle of Man.
It's good to talk. It's how we get things done. So when you apply for a personal loan from Black Horse, you'll get support from one of our relationship managers who's there to talk you through your application. You could borrow up to £50,000 with up to 7 years to pay it back, and you could receive your money within 24 hours of approval. Ready to talk? Go to blackhorseoffshore.co.uk to request a call back today. Finance subject to status. Applicants must be 18 or over.
ShopRite. Shopping that's better all round. Shopping that costs less before you even start. Less travel, fuel and time. Because our stores are local to you. Prices? ShopRite has low prices as well as price matching. And Switch and Save is something else. Sainsbury's own brand. Hundreds of items you buy every day. Famous Sainsbury's quality assured, adding up to pounds less at the checkout. ShopRite, proudly locally owned.
At Manx Petroleum, we're here for you and all the great work our local charities do for our community. Charities like the Rob Vine Fund, set up to provide the best possible medical rescue care, equipment and training during most of the island's motorsport events. Throughout May and June, you can help support the Rob Vine Fund too. Just fill up with Manx Petroleum Super Unleaded and we'll make a cash donation for each and every litre. To learn more about the Rob Vine Fund and to make a direct donation, visit robvinefund.im.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
And John Curtis and Andrew Langan-Newton are on today. And hi, John, you're live with Andrew and John.
Oh, first of my gentlemen. Yes, I've been talking about this for the last 3 years, ever since the so-called climate emergency was imposed on the Isle of Man. Where do you start, indeed? I believe this is top-down. Starting with the WEF, the UN, the global elites, and it's ignoring the actual science of measurement of the world's parameters. Ever since Earth Day in 1970, politicians, scientists, activists, royalty have all made catastrophic predictions, none of which have come true. And the same is about carbon dioxide, that essential food for photosynthesis, which the increase of which has greatly improved the world's agricultural activities.
Okay, have you got a question for us, John?
No, well, I'd just like to say the University of Alabama has been going for 40 years, and they predict an increase of 0.13 degrees centigrade per decade. So that's about 1 degree C by 2100. The NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, come to the same sort of figure, about 0.14 degrees C per decade. There is no increase in the temperature, the atmospheric temperature, where allegedly carbon dioxide is supposed to have a warming effect. Since around the year 2000. So totally lacking any scientific evidence from data worldwide. And we can look at temperature, rainfall, sea level rise, hurricanes, wildfires, floods, droughts. There has been no trend in any of them in increasing at all.
Okay, all right, we get the picture. So I'll put the question directly to Andrew Langan and John Curtis. Is this all a conspiracy and a con by the elites, the World Economic Fund, the Bilderberg Group, royal families, big corporations and multinationals? Andrew Langan-Newton.
It's not, and I would disagree with this.
And I'm not being facetious, but that is a charge levelled all the time.
Yeah, so no, I don't agree with that charge. And also the data points the other way, exactly the other way. And we've got data for the Isle of Man alone that clearly shows the Isle of Man is subject to this huge warming. And that's impacting the Isle of Man directly already, not just everywhere else in the world.
Okay, if you could just counter them. We were threatened, if you like, years ago, 40-odd years ago, that fridges would destroy the ozone layer, that CFCs in fridges would now we charge £60 to get rid of a fridge. We were told that methane would destroy the ozone layer and that the layer above Antarctica would disappear, and it hasn't. So in the past, the public all over the world has been told that these cataclysmic climate crises are going to happen, and Andrew, they don't.
But we responded to the ozone layer destruction with a huge global unprecedented collaboration to hugely reduce the causes of the destruction of the ozone layer. And so that's a huge success story that we should look to as an exemplar for how we should now respond to these crucial issues. But my final point, just quickly, is that it's not just about contesting climate change and resolving that issue, but it's also about creating a cleaner, better community directly in the Isle of Man. If we have cleaner spaces, especially in our conurbations, like I point to Lord Street down there in Douglas, huge amounts of pollution, and groups like Friends of the Earth have taken studies to show that they're breaching European Union standards at times, and the Isle of Man government has failed under the Public Act to pursue this. We see now that they might start beginning the testing in those communities, like the Quarter Bridge, for example, for direct pollution. So decarbonising our transport is one illustration of how we can improve public health. So to stand in the way of that is to stand in the way of a public health imperative.
Okay, and as far as the worldwide capitalist system, John, I'll imbue you with that right. You're speaking on behalf of world capitalism. Is this just a conspiracy by world capitalists to make even more money under the guise of greenwashing?
First of all, I'd like to point out, Andy, that Ronald's Way measured the temperature. They've been measuring the temperature every day for the last 20, 30 years, and it has gone up by 1.1 degrees, not 0.14. And that is the same. Probably you can find a meteorological station in Alabama as well. Let me tell you, I was in the States recently. It's hotter there. In fact, there are places where it's 3 to 5 degrees hotter in any one time. I travel the world a lot, and I can say that climate change is happening, and it's happening very badly. As a matter of fact, it is business that's going to fix the problem. As I mentioned before, to capture large amounts of carbon dioxide, we can't plant enough trees to fix the problem. The problem needs to be fixed in the next 7 to 27 years, basically, to 2050. It is investment, it is banking, it is engineering companies that are already starting to create green hydrogen off the old North Sea oil platforms. Generally speaking, I would say that big business, yes, it did cause the problem because of the huge demand for energy, and if there's a demand for something, then companies will fill the gap and they'll produce it.
Is this another industrial revolution?
I would say it's more a cultural revolution, that we have to think about the way we live our lives in a very different way. You know, we are going to have to consider the modes of transport, whether it's right to have school runs, for example, in the morning when there are buses put on for children to come in and out of Douglas. I would say yes, it is a revolution, and it will be some form of industrial revolution, because we are going to need to have all of the energy. Parts of the world don't have any energy at all, but that can be solved by the renewables problem. But also the way we live our lives, I think, is going to change in the next 25, 30 years.
Okay, Andrew Langan-Newton. Now, this is going to affect how we travel, how we consume energy, what we eat, in some cases, how we heat our homes and buildings, how we look after the environment. The question is, how do we make sure the vulnerable aren't left behind? Because at the moment, you have to have money to be green, and the government may be putting some money in, but they're not making the pathway frictionless for the layperson, for the person who has a house and a vehicle. How do we make sure that vulnerable people aren't left behind?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And under Section 21 of the Climate Change Act 2021, there is provisions, principles that government decision-making must be made through climate justice, taking account of the most vulnerable and the most impacted in our society, and equitable decisions, fair decisions that we make. And so, yes, wealthy people can afford more to put solar panels on their roof spaces, to put batteries in. That is a benefit, though. That means people, and heat pumps as well, businesses in the Isle of Man are getting customers where they can learn the skills to put these solar panels on the roof spaces of heat pumps in, and then they can create, and other businesses can go, I want a piece of that, I want to invest in that marketplace, and they can start to compete and push the price down for all users. So we are seeing this huge transition. I think I said at the start of your programme, and with Minister Cannon's announcement in February 2023, we are seeing 2023 as a huge significant year in the uptake in solar panels, air source heat pumps, and electric vehicles. We should look more to our government. For example, the rollback on the £2 fares. That, again, was something the Green Party was actively against. We've been calling for free public transport. We need joined-up government, and public transport has to be like that. We talk about how we plan our society, how we transport within it. Public transport and active travel have to play fundamental roles in that. We have about 60,000, in the region of 60,000 private cars in the Isle of Man, a population of 83,000. Huge amount of cars were driven by that, and we need to, the government, have an obligation to create a fairer society for us all.
It's worth considering that free public transport would cost the Isle of Man about £2 million a year, and we've just paid, or will be paying far more than that, to Dr. Rosalind Ranson. Mark, you're live with John Curtis and Andrew Langan-Newton. Hello.
Yeah, hi, Andy. An awful lot of respect with what Andy and John are talking about in terms of developing green energy, but I think I've mentioned before on your program, what I do struggle with is the slightly sort of radical nature of what they're talking about in terms of, yes, it's all about going green, but it's not going to be one solution. And I think, if there was one solution, and I want to say one solution, one green solution, wind, tide, hydro, then all the countries in the world would be doing it. And the fact is, I think I remember you mentioned before, I'm in shipping, and I'm very heavily exposed to LNG shipping. And countries like Germany, which has a massive wind farm technology, are heavily investing in gas because they don't have the base load technology. Countries like Finland have now classified gas and nuclear as green energy. We're interested to see where Andrew stands on that. And it's about the transition. They mention the word transition, that countries are actually transitioning over. But it's extremely dangerous for them not to talk about how they're going to transition over. And gas and fossil fuels are part of that transition. And I think it's important that, the Green Party actually acknowledge that, because at the moment they're sounding like salesmen. They're sounding like selling the green technology, and that's the way forward. But there's no bridge from how we get from point A to point B. Myself, I've looked at solar power and I've looked at wind as well. I'm fortunate enough to have enough land to actually think about putting wind turbine in my. And at the moment, the economics don't actually add up. When the economics add up, I'm happy to do that. So I'm not anti-green, I'm not pro-fossil, but it has to be a rational conversation, and they have to document how they're going to transition from A to B. And at the moment, they're falling way short of that. And that's all I'd like to say, Andy.
Okay, appreciate that. So Andrew Langan-Newton?
Yeah, great question. And in fairness, I think, I would start off by saying Antonio Guterres, the General Secretary of the United Nations, he then recently, I think it was last year, described that people against this transition are now the radicals. Actually, the whole world is going this way. So we're not making it up in the Isle of Man. We're just looking and going, we were talking about this in 2016, and now the Isle of Man government, now Manx Utilities are starting to catch up. And on the Manx Utilities point, that's crucial, because in February 2023, Manx Utilities published a document on their website, 24-page document called the Summary of the WSP Report. Now, this is crucial because that full document, the full WSP report, isn't in the public domain, but you can go to their website, you can see how Manx Utilities thinks that transition is going to take place, and that's going to involve wind turbines and solar panels and batteries and other potential technologies after 2030. But that is a grey area, because my view is that we're going to have an abundance of wind and solar and batteries, so we don't need to go into these marginal technologies on the edges.
Is nuclear green?
Well, I'm not a fan of nuclear. There's other people who say it's positive.
You're leader of the Green Party in the Isle of Man. If the Isle of Man were to adopt, well, at the moment we do get nuclear electricity down the interconnector to Bispham. We get a mix of electricity. But would you, I mean, they're making, Bill Gates is talking about buying out those Rolls-Royce mini reactors. Bill Gates is getting involved in those mini nuclear reactors. If we were to have one in Bride, do you think that will be a good idea?
So the Isle of Man Green Party is clearly, just for the record, saying no to nuclear on the Isle of Man. In the Isle of Man, other Green parties around the world might have different situations. They might have existing nuclear facilities that they want to perpetuate to build into this transition. However, not for the Isle of Man. It would be disastrous, and also it would bind us to a resource that's coming from around the world. We would be still shipping in uranium or plutonium. We're not mining uranium or plutonium in Snaefell mines. We'd have to bring that in. We've already got the wind, the solar, the tide in the Isle of Man.
Okay, John Curtis. So how do we make the transition, I'm not saying palatable, but understandable, easy, frictionless for the public?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out I'm not quite as against that. I think they should consider the possibility of a small nuclear reactor. It shouldn't be immediately discounted. That's my personal opinion. As you pointed out, Andy, yourself just a moment ago, some of the electricity that comes along on the interconnector, some of the pieces of toast that are cooked on the island in the morning are coming from a nuclear power station. So if you adopt the point of view, no nuclear, but I'll use it if it's made somewhere else, you're like the Germans. Because in Germany, they banned all nuclear reactors, but they're quite happy to buy electricity.
Take it from France.
That comes from France. Yeah. So this is a very tricky. Base load is the problem, but base load in Europe, for example, and we are interconnected with Europe by high voltage direct current lines, as a matter of fact. Base load will usually exist somewhere, provided we are all interconnected with the electricity. We can get electricity from other parts of the world where we have a lot of wind power at some point, as Andy mentioned right in the beginning when he spoke. If we're producing an excess on some days, as indeed happens in the UK, on some days 100% of the UK is powered by wind power. And that happens about 20-30 days of the year, and they export the excess across to Europe. So in a big interconnected grid system, some places can always rely upon the base load that's coming from somewhere else.
Well, we've got to go. Thanks to, by the way, the two of you will come back, won't you? Because we've only touched about 10% of it. Thanks to Andrew Langan-Newton and John Curtis today. Our net zero aspirations.
WINT.